Hey folks, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk about elastic load balancer health checks. Now, in the last lesson, we set up an elastic load balancer and we just accepted the default for health checks. Now we're going to go into a little more detail on health checks. Additionally, we can utilize elastic load balancer health checks even in our auto scaling group. So we're going to discuss and actually configure that elastic load balancer in front of an auto scaling group of EC2 instances, and we're going to configure health checks for that architecture. So in the DevOps doctrine, let's go into our ELB health checks. All right, in our scenario, we have an elastic load balancer and EC2 instances that are registered with this ELB. Now, optionally, we could also have an auto-scaling group in this scenario. And we'll go ahead and do that in the hands-on part of the lesson, but the auto-scaling group is optional. So what's going on here? Well, to discover the availability of your EC2 instances, an elastic load balancer periodically sends pings, attempts connections, or send requests to the EC2 instances. And just looking at the little chart here, the red indicates a failed attempt, either a ping or a connection attempt or a request. The statuses of the instances that are healthy at the time of the health check is in service. The status of any instances that are unhealthy at the time of the health check is out of service. The load balancer performs health checks on all registered instances, whether the instance is in a healthy state or an unhealthy state. And again, a little later in the lesson, we're going to use ELB health checks with an auto-scaling group. All right, before we create an auto-scaling group and configure it to use ELB health checks, let's talk about a few more key concepts for ELB health checks. So the elastic load balancer will periodically send pings, attempt connections. We know the ELB will periodically check the health of our EC2 instances. And the status of a healthy instance is in service. Unhealthy instance's status is out of service. The ELB will perform health checks on all registered instances. This is key, but it routes requests only to healthy instances. Now, if an unhealthy instance becomes healthy again, the ELB will again route traffic to it. And this is a key point, and that's why the ELB periodically checks all registered instances. The load balancer can use either the default health check configuration provided by the ELB or a health check configuration that you configure. Now, if you have associated your auto-scaling group with a classic load balancer, you can use the load balancer health check to determine the health state of instances in your group. So let's talk a bit about that. So an auto-scaling group periodically checks the health status of each instance. Now, by default, it uses EC2 status checks only, but it can use EC2 status checks and ELB health checks. And if it determines that an instance is unhealthy, it replaces the instance. Now, if you're only using EC2 status checks, but you do have an ELB attached, the auto-scaling group is only going to use the EC2 status checks to determine the EC2 instance health. So you have to configure your auto-scaling group to determine health status using both EC2 status checks and elastic load balancing health checks. Let's go see this in action with some hands-on work. So let's create an auto-scaling group first. And let's go ahead and create a new launch configuration. Amazon Linux AMI, T2 Micro. And let's just attach a role for auto-scaling groups. Advanced details, nothing really in here. Possibility we might SSH into this instance at some point. And let's skip to review. Create launch configuration. Create a new key pair. And we can download it and create our launch configuration. Now we can go ahead and create our auto-scaling group. And let's just start with one instance and choose a subnet. And let's click for our load balancing. And there is our ELB that we created in the logging lesson. Target groups is for an application load balancer. We don't need that. Other than that, let's just accept the defaults. And note that the default is only EC2 health check type. All right, configure scaling policies. We're not going to do much here. Let's just keep this group at its initial size. And click review. Okay, let's create our auto-scaling group. And let's view it. And we have an instance spinning up. All right, now for our health check, we just accepted the default. And I just wanted to show that you can edit this at any time. So let's go to the Health Check tab and let's click Edit Health Check. And note the ping protocol, both HTTP and HTTPS on layer 7 and TCP and SSL on layer 4. Let's just keep HTTP, ping path, index HTML. If your health check is pinging your instance and you get some kind of a code, an HTTP code other than a 200, it's very probable that you don't have an index HTML. So that's a key point. Just make sure that your instance is properly configured with an index HTML. And if we chose to, we could edit the response timeout and our interval, which is our amount of time between health checks. Response timeout is the time to wait when receiving a response from the health check. Unhealthy threshold, number of consecutive health check failures before declaring an EC2 instance unhealthy, and the healthy threshold. And let's click Save. Over to our auto-scaling group that is registered to our ELB. Remember, we set this up with a default health check of only EC2. So right now, it doesn't matter what our ELB is saying about the health of our EC2 instance. So let's click Edit and Health Check Type. Change that to ELB and let's click Save. I notice looking at my Elastic Load Balancer that the EC2 instances are out of service. Then I watch it for a while. I also notice the instances going from 3 instances to 2 and then back to 3 again. So what's going on there? Well, the auto-scaling group is now checking the ELB health and it's getting this out of service. So this one instance is in the auto-scaling group. The other 2 instances are from the previous lesson. But the instance in the auto-scaling group is being terminated because of the unhealthy out-of-service status, and then the auto-scaling group will keep trying to launch a new instance. And this cycle repeats itself. So why are our instances registering as out of service? Well, let's find out. Really, there are 2 main culprits here. So first of all, you just have to ensure that the security groups, the security group for your load balancer and the security group for your instance or instances both allow inbound traffic from the other on the port that you're using. Now, that's the one culprit, but the other, and I know this is what's going on. Let's check the health check. So, we're pinging on HTTP, and again, we're pinging index HTML. Well, that's a problem. We didn't set an index HTML for any of our listeners. Now, that's an easy fix. But an even quicker fix, and in the essence of time, let's just change this. Let's do TCP, and let's just change this to port 22. Just show a little versatility in our health checks. And the rest of this we can keep the same. Click Save. Now, won't happen instantaneously, but it happens pretty quickly. You see our instances are now in service. So we got to do a little bit of quick troubleshooting. And with that, we have completed this lesson. So go ahead and mark this one complete. And let's move on to the next.